How's it, guys? Welcome back. Ready for chapter 22. Got my tea already made. Cheers. So let's get going. Early retirement. Pray you, let's have no more fooling about it, but give me your blessing. I am your boy that was, your son that is, your child that shall be. Again, Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare. Male menopause was nothing compared to Judy leaving. I lost my drive, so to speak. Then Mrs. Goldman became a nightmare to me day and night. I was talked into making a bridge that I didn't want to do because of the angle of the teeth. It failed, and maybe it was luck. Or maybe not. But I was up in Zaire, visiting a friend when the teeth blew up. Another dentist took out the two abutment teeth. And so instead of having a gap of one tooth, poor Mrs. Goldman now had a gap of 3 teeth. A lawsuit where I was skinned, tanned, tied in a pink ribbon, and handed to her on a platter would have been easier than what I went through with her on a daily basis. Judy left and moved to somewhere in the United States. I went through a string of 8 assistants in 3 months. Some only lasted 2 days, and one nurse, after only 20 minutes, told me straight, "I don't like you," and walked out. I went up to the front and called Phyllis to my office. "Phyllis, I want to quit." "Yep, I've been expecting this, Bill. I'm already planning on moving near my son in South Africa." Woman's intuition is an amazing thing. How long are you going for?" 10 years. A thumbsuck figure that sounded good to me. "And what do you plan to do in those 10 years?" she asked. She had this twinkle in her eye that was almost envious. She took the pot and poured 2 cups of tea and settled down to listen. "I'm now 38 years old. The war is over, and I have a whole list of things I want to do before I'm too old, and don't have the energy or drive to do them." I stare out the window to the north. "Are you not just running away, Bill? You know that doesn't work." "Running from what?" I asked. "Well, Judy leaving, being excommunicated from your church, having post-traumatic stress syndrome, divorce, just to name a few." I smiled, thinking how Phyllis could shoot straighter than most people I know. "I just need to go out and spend some time in the bush, get away from people for a while, and let nature do its magic. I've always wanted to live in a baobab tree for some reason." Yeah, me too. "Canoe the Zambezi, collect snakes in Zaire, build things, go fishing, travel, and I have this crazy dream of owning a ranch where I can raise wild animals, put down some roots, taste the freedom I used to have when I lived in Uganda." You know that you pay an expensive price for freedom." She was talking about something I didn't understand at the time. "Anyway, Bill, I'm not trying to change your plans. Just be aware of what's out there." She stood and took me in those big strong arms and gave me a good hug. A month later found me at the confluence of the Kafue and Zambezi rivers, inland on the Zimbabwe side, about 200 meters. I'd found a huge baobab tree with a small hole about 3 feet off the ground. From this hole came the smell of bat dung, which told me that the tree was hollow. I took my chopper and enlarged the hole until it was just big enough to crawl into. A lot of hollow baobabs have snakes living in them, but there are 2 things that snakes hate: bat dung and bees. If there is a hive inside the tree, you are also safe from snakes. There is one baobab tree near a track in the Urungwe hunting area that has combs of honey 2 meters high. Twice I have slept in that tree, knowing that I will not be troubled by any creepy crawlies. Talk to Garth Thompson about snakes in hollow baobabs. He tells of climbing into a burial site that is inside a baobab tree in the Sapi area. Some people believe it is the site where Chief Chikwenya was buried. The hole was a few feet off the ground, and so he climbed up and jumped into the tree. When he landed, a mamba raised itself up to his eye level, and he tells how it was a moment that he knew he was going to die. He stood still, and the snake disappeared into a hole, and then appeared again at the place where Garth had just crawled in. He sat still for what seemed an eternity, but it was probably 20 minutes, and then climbed out. It's after moments like these that the heat of the sun is so sweet. The monotonous chanting of the crested barbet sounds like Beethoven's very best. An impala urine smells like jasmine in August. There's nothing like riding on the edge of disaster to make the most mundane things in life seem like pure sunshine. Yeah, my dad and I call them NDEs, near-death experiences, and we've each had a few of them, a few NDEs. And so it was that I found a suitable tree. I took 4 balls of elephant dung and set them alight. They don't burn, they only smolder, giving off an acrid smoke. Bats hate it and will not return to a tree that has had elephant dung burnt in it. I found this out from the honey hunters that make their living gathering wild honey. I then took out all the guano in a bucket and dumped it in an abandoned ant bear hole. I then brought in sand from the river and made a fine river sand floor. I couldn't climb the tree from the outside, but on the inside there were these ledges all the way up, and I could stick my head out of the tree about 20 feet up. It was a large hole and let in a lot of light. I could also make a fire inside, and using dry mapani wood, there was no smoke visible from the outside. Cutting a small wait-a-bit bush, at night I could pull this by its stem into the entrance I had chopped, and not even a rat could get in. I had a safe shelter. So those wait-a-bit thorns, or the Afrikaans call them waggebietjie, means wait a bit. They've got these hook-like thorns, They are proper sharp and proper strong, Because it's called wait a bit, because if you get caught in the bush, then you're gonna wait a bit. You are not getting out of that very easily. That thing will hook you, and it'll rip your clothes, If you're not, you might actually have to rip your clothes to get out of it. It's a bit more painful when it hooks your skin. The first night I spent in my tree, I slept on the sand. I made dips to fit the different parts of my body. Through the hole at the top of the tree, I could see the stars. Before I knew it, the night was gone. As dawn broke, I was blessed with the visit of a flock of brown-headed parrots that took it upon themselves to awaken the whole veld. My life on the river had begun. Every day was taken up searching for food. I was in a national parks area, so I was not allowed to shoot anything, but I was allowed to fish. I never knew there were so many species of fish. John Minchell, the local ichthyologist, would have been proud of me. I had to make some money, so I decided to do canoe safaris downriver. I decided to take my safaris right from the base of the Kariba Dam wall, instead of 5 kilometers downriver, like the rest of the canoe safari operators. I got a couple of canoes for our maiden voyage. And for our maiden voyage, Bones and I packed all the camping gear in both canoes. And after getting permission from Capco, the owners of that part of the river, we set off from the base of the wall. I had never done canoeing before, but I had seen movies about it. All you had to do was paddle in the water on one side, and then on the other. Couldn't be that hard. Bones and I had paddled around in dams before. This man has never canoed before, and decides to learn how to canoe on the Zambezi River. So we pushed off, and the next thing we knew, we were in a rapid that had huge whirlpools. The first one we came to sucked both of us in our canoes right underwater. As we went down, I shouted to Bones, "Don't let go of the paddle, Bones!" I was close enough to Bones' canoe that I hung on desperately to both of them. In a few seconds, I popped up, still hanging onto the 2 canoes, but they were both upside down. Bones was gone. I called and called, but no Bones. The river was flowing very fast, and I floated past crocodiles laying on the banks. At one rocky point, a leopard looked up from drinking, and had to stand there having a second look, not believing what it was seeing. When it finally registered that this thing was a human, it tore up the bank and disappeared into the rocks. I floated like this with the nose of both canoes tightly locked under my arms for 5 kilometers, and finally came to the shore on the Zambian side, right across from where the canoe safaris usually start. Oh, so this is why they start down here instead of at the wall. The river had calmed down and changed into the idyllic, smooth Zambezi you usually see in the movies. But I had lost Bones. I pulled the 2 canoes out of the river, and all that remained of our camping gear was one soggy sleeping bag and a bag of potatoes. I sat down to recuperate on a rock, and the loss of Bones finally caught up with me. The tears flowed down my face, and I didn't even try to stifle my loud sobbing. Even though Bones had been my servant, he was more like my brother. Bones never worked hours. He just worked as long as work needed to be done, just like myself. We ate sadza, the hard maize meal porridge, out of the same pot. We knew about each other's family problems. We were always together. Thinking about all the problems that had hit me recently, I felt I had genuinely hit rock bottom. When I heard a huffing and puffing and the slap of bare feet on the rocks. "Ha! Masango! I thought you were dead!" Bones shouted. "Bones, are you all right?" I shouted back. "Ah, Masango, I am so happy today. I really thought you were dead." I could see the tears on his cheeks. He came running over to me and held up the paddle. Then he put it down, and there on a small patch of sand, on the Zambian side of the Zambezi River, we hugged, we danced, we laughed, shouted at the baboons at the top of the gorge, and hugged some more. Sure, man. That must have been... Sure, I can't imagine that. Both of them thought they had lost the other. Bones had seen my paddle upriver a few hundred meters on the Zimbabwe side. We crossed over in one canoe and walked together until we found my paddle and then came back. After recrossing to the Zambian side, we decided to go downriver until we found a suitable camping spot. We had only gone a couple of kilometers when we found a sandy beach with lots of driftwood for a fire. It was only then that we realized that we had lost our matches. So we sat eating raw potatoes. The weather was very warm, so we slept next to each other on the sand that night. Breakfast was more raw potatoes, and that was what we ate for the next 3 days that it took us to get to Mana Pools. We decided that we would only go for the 3-day safaris from Chirundu, as this was a lot easier, and we wouldn't have to deal with a lot of ferrying of canoes, etc. After that one trip, we were professionals. After all, we had caps, we had a Land Cruiser, and very little else. We managed to borrow 2 more canoes and some camping gear, and put ourselves on the market. Our first clients were 6 South Africans. There were 2 two-man kayaks atop their vehicle, which made it perfect for us. They were from Johannesburg, but were here for some fun. We made a special deal for them as they were going to take their own food, and then we set off. When we stopped for lunch, I found out that they had all run the Comrades Marathon just for fun. That's a 90-kilometer marathon. They did a lot of canoeing on the weekends and were training for the Ironman marathon coming up. I spoke in Indebele to Bones. "These whites are going to kill us, Bones. They're all professionals. What are we going to do?" "I already saw that they were stronger than us. I put most of our camping gear in the boats already during lunch. We can ride at the back, and they will not see how we struggle to keep up with them. It is only 3 days, Masango." It was one of the most grueling 3 days of my life. My forearms burned constantly, and by the end of the day, Bones and I were so tired we could hardly stay awake. Bones and I were so tired we could hardly stay awake long enough to tell the usual bush stories around the campfire at night. Now the Chinese speak of the yin and yang of life, the sweet and the sour. Bones and I had had our sour, but when we got to Mana Pools, we had our sweet. All of them wanted to go on an extended walk in the bush. I didn't realize that the muscles you used for running were different than the muscles you used for walking. Halfway through our walk, they were all finished, and I hadn't even begun to get warm. However, they forgot how tired they were when we came face to face with a black rhino. I then took them through a herd of elephant and past some buffalo on the way back to camp. And that night, Bones and I were the only ones sitting next to the campfire. Oh, how sweet. We had completed our first canoe safari and had money in our pockets. Enough to go to Harare and buy some camping gear. Whilst in Harare, we met 4 secretaries who wanted a river trip. "We are looking for guaranteed excitement, and not from you," their leader exclaimed. I could see this was going to be a wild trip. They were a pleasant bunch of single ladies, trapped in a rat race that they couldn't get out of. A race that whether you won or not, you were still a rat. That's pretty profound, eh? Yeah, I'll give you guaranteed excitement. All you have to do is meet me at Chirundu on Friday. Do you want to bring your own food, or do you want me to wine and dine you? Cheaper if you bring your own. I was hoping they would bring their own, as I only knew how to cook bush food. "Oh, we'll bring our own," they chorused. Friday they were all there. They were giggling and carrying on like schoolgirls. We set out in 3 canoes, Bones and I carrying most of the gear in a large Indian canoe I had bought. 2 minutes out of Chirundu, they were shouting at each other, pulling off their bikini tops and having water fights. Bones and I just hung back and let them drift down the river. The wilds have a magical way of releasing all those pent-up stresses. Amen. And these girls were cutting loose. At dinner, they kept teasing Bones and me, and gave us a fine meal. The moon was full, and on the spur of the moment, I asked them if they wanted to do a 3-hour drift on the river that night. "For sure, that sounds great." They were so enthusiastic. Not a sound, no talking. I have to go first, and if there is any talking to be done, I'll do it. Is this understood? I knew that poachers came across from Zambia at night, and I didn't want to be fired on them if they thought we were national parks. There wasn't a breath of air. Hippos were getting ready to get out of the water and go grazing. Elephants were down at the river's edge drinking. Sometimes we would drift into a herd of hippo, and I would gently tap them with my paddle on the edge of my canoe. And I would gently tap with my paddle on the edge of my canoe, and the hippos would spread a path. Suddenly, someone called out from a dugout canoe in Shona. "Who's that?" I look at Bones. He shouts back in Shona, "Just another family looking for money." Then the pleasantries followed. The next dugout canoe had people from East Africa, probably the Sudan, and this time they shouted in Swahili. I replied, and from 100 meters away, no one is able to tell the difference in the moonlight. We counted 32 dugout canoes that night, ferrying poachers back and forth across the river. To all of this was a very sobering, knowing that at this rate, our rhino were headed for extinction. The wildlife itself would not be able to stand up to such an invasion. In a small bay, I pulled into a good spot in a clump of Natal mahogany. A lone buffalo bull stood nearby and watched us set up our beds. I didn't have tents, but made stretchers for the ladies, putting 2 stretchers under each double mosquito net. Hot drinks were made, and we were all so excited about our moonlight drift that none of us wanted to go to bed. It was the first time I'd ever done something like that, and it was also the first time I'd gotten a perspective on how bad the poaching in the Zambezi Valley was. Everyone was talking and saying how great this experience was, but I think I was having more fun than anyone. Dawn was breaking, and I was rolled off my stretcher onto the ground, still in my sleeping bag. "Shake him out of his bag and see if he wears pajamas," a scantily dressed lady shouts. They all try to pull me out of my sleeping bag, but they were no match for me. I can tell you that woke me up quicker than 10 cups of coffee. During the day, they all took turns riding with me in my canoe, making Bones ride with one of them. They tried to get me to talk, but I am a master of getting people to talk about themselves, and this I did. They all had a story to tell, and all needed this trip so badly. This was medicine I wanted people to experience, something only Mother Nature could heal. So, when are we getting our guaranteed excitement? One of them asked. Wasn't last night enough? I counter. Nah, we want something real exciting. Well, I think that after lunch you'll have a bit of excitement, I said as calmly as possible. We were getting near to where the Rekomochi River comes into the Zambezi. Just upriver from there is an island, and on the inside of the island is a famous hippo called Harry. He's not mean, but doesn't like anyone invading his territory. Most canoeists take the route on the outside of the island, but I'd never heard of anyone being mauled by Harry, so I made a plan. When we got to the top of the island, I said, just take a ride across the lower point of the island, and I'll follow you. The first canoe went, and halfway across, Harry came up under the canoe, lifting it and the two ladies right up out of the water. They came down with a mighty splash, and then tipped over and were floundering around in the water screaming. I was seconds behind and quickly had the two ladies hanging onto the side of my canoe. Bones and I eased them in, balancing carefully so as to not tip over, and took them to the island, which was only a few meters away. The other ladies followed with frightened eyes. Once we had deposited our clients safely on land, Bones and I went and retrieved their canoe. We brought it back to them with the paddles. Is that enough excitement for you ladies? You swine! You planned this! The mud started to fly, and suddenly I had hands full of mud rubbing my face, my back, and great globs being stuffed down my shorts. Bones was laughing. Now, Masango, you are black like me, he chortled. After the excitement had subsided, I was keen to get going, as I wanted to camp on an island just above Vundu Camp. But to get those ladies back in the canoes, no way. They had had enough, and even though they were still in good spirits, they were happy now just to get across to the mainland and camp there. It took a lot of persuading to get them even to cross, and then float about 100 meters to the mouth of the Rekomochi River bed, where I set up camp. I had Bones stay there with them, and then I took off on my own and did the 35 kilometers to Mana Pools, where I had left my Land Cruiser waiting for me, with some food and a few extra luxuries for camping. It was 11 that night when I drove back to the camp. Everyone was still up around the fire talking. Apparently, just before I had arrived, a herd of elephant had come down to drink, and they were all still chattering about that. The fire from the Mapani logs has all died down into a pile of red coals. A water dikkop is singing its mournful song. A hyena is whooping in the distance, and every once in a while we can hear the rumble of an elephant's stomach. A bottle of red private cellar is passed around. I sit and listen to all the stories, most of them coming from the heart. Before we go to bed, I can hear the ground hornbills heralding a new day, even though it's still dark. I sit by the fire and in 2 hours make some coffee for myself, but all the girls are out for the count. Finally, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I wake them and get them some breakfast before we set off to Mana Pools, where I have a camping spot booked for us. It seemed like a blink, and the trip was over. I even felt like I had changed on this trip. They all wanted to come and spend a night with me in my tree, but I didn't let them. I dropped them off in Churundu, and Bones and I drove along the river, parked the Land Cruiser in some thick bush, and for 2 days lazed about near our tree. An army patrol came by. They were supposed to be on an anti-poaching patrol. Bones and I climbed up inside the tree and watched them go by. They didn't even seem to notice the ground, or the fact that there was a bit of disturbance around. Inside our tree that night, Bones and I boiled a tin of sweetened condensed milk. It cooled in a bucket of water while we ate our sadza and beans. Afterwards, to the music of lions roaring in the distance, we ate our love in a tin. Retirement wasn't half bad. Alright, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed. Have a good night, sleep well, and see you tomorrow. Cheers.